We're starting our working day in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Now we are starting the first press briefings with some representatives of associations, business experts, and civil society who are unhappy with some of the regulations which were submitted by the Cabinet of Ministers to the Verkhovna Rada. So now we will be talking to Illya Drogovoz, Vice President of UMB. Also, Illya Drogovoz is the member of the working group at the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine. Oksana Prodan, MP, Deputy Head of the Parliament Tax and Customs Committee. Tatyana Shevtsova, Auditor Capital Plus, member of the working group at Ukraine's Finance Ministry. Illya Neskhodovskyi, expert on tax group. Dmytro, Mykhaylenko, head of the Entrepreneurs Tax Committee of the Chamber of Commerce. Olga Bogdanova, auditor, expert of Ukrainian Chamber of Tax Advisors, and other experts, out of which Mykhaylo Sokolov, Ukrainian Agrarian Council. The first one is Illya Drogovoz. Good morning. I will start from saying that on Monday, on the 22nd, in Ukrainian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs was the roundtable dedicated to discussion of the tax reform, and all the experts present at the roundtable and the business which participated there all stated about their negative assessment of the package of reforms, because the reforms include not just tax reforms, but the reforms in the sphere of social insurance. If we assess it as comprehensively, there are too many risks for business, and the whole procedure of passing this draft law causes a lot of concern. Let's start from saying that quite recently there was a concept of reform of the tax system was presented, and business had the opportunity to discuss all the things which are in the concept, and all stated their disagreement with the conceptual issues. There were letters sent, but instead of a reaction, we got even worse option in the form of draft law. Before we discuss these draft laws, we need to say that it's difficult to correct technically the draft law, which as a concept is not accepted by business. It's not directed towards legalizing revenues. It will not take the salaries out of the shadow, but at the same time it strengthens the responsibility for not paying salaries, for not paying salaries on time, for not employing a person if there's and talking about some positive things altogether in the form which it is, when also this version only when draft laws were submitted to the Verkhovna Rada. Basically, the MPs were in the same situation as business and civil society. And now there's some work going on these draft laws. No one has seen a final version. Today there was a meeting of the working group on finance only on one section on the income tax, and they decided that this package will be submitted on the 14th of October. We can say that this cannot be adopted in the form as it is, because there will be millions of problems for business, starting from harmonization of accounting. Everyone supported the idea, but execution is not good. It does not just cancel the dual accounting, but creates a lot of uncertainties, because tax administration has to check whether accounting and reporting corresponds to the standards, national and international standards of accounting and reporting. So basically, the tax administration now has the functions of the auditor, because only auditors can confirm the correctness of the accounting and reporting, and there are no people who are able to do that, and we believe that just this thing could cause lots of problems and conflicts for taxpayers. Also, they suggest sort of a good norm. There are some preferences provided for those who work on a simplified system of taxation. They suggest to reduce the rate for the third group from 3 to 2% and from 5 to 4%. Besides the groups 5 and 6, physical persons who are paying single tax, and legal entities against which IMF was. These groups are transferred to Group 3. This will all be called Group 3, but the rates will be reduced. If now for these groups there are rates 5-7%, now this will be 4%. On the one hand, if the taxpayers are honest, that seems to be good. But on the other hand, when the responsibility is increased for violation of labor relations, increased responsibility other responsibilities. We understand that on the one hand it's sort of strengthening, but on the other hand some sort of an offshore zone is offered where some preferences are offered. So there's certain disbalance, and all that has to be balanced, and all these responsibilities to be fairly distributed. I don't say that this simplified system is to be strengthened. Either rates should be raised, but we say that first we need to create conditions for legalizing all the business. We need to give the chance to small business to work, but also to give chance to work for big and medium-sized business. I will give the floor to my colleagues, and you will hear what was our conclusion and what has been done, because we are doing a lot of work. Just at the first stage, we need to stop voting at the Verkhovna Rada so that the laws are worked on additionally, so that the business and the civil society can work on them. Now I would like to give the floor to colleagues. I would like to request, because we have many experts, take just a couple of minutes. Oksana, Prodan, MP, and the first deputy head of the committee. Tax and Customs Committee. Business is now talking about these reforms, but that doesn't mean that this draft law is only for business. What business has to pay, this will be included into the cost of the goods, and that means that the consumers will have to pay that, and that the business read these draft laws first. That means that business is struggling for survival, and they have to read as quickly as possible what the government is suggesting to change economic conditions. When these draft laws were presented, they were saying that these are the reforms which will improve the investment climate in Ukraine. But when we read that, we understand that they kill all the production. There are many representatives of business. I will be talking not about business. I will talk about two aspects which concern average people, a person who lives on the territory of Ukraine. First, it's real estate tax and the powers of the tax office. The draft law provides for liquidating the tax on real estate. If today the citizens who have the apartments up to 120 square meters or the buildings up to 240 square meters do not pay real estate tax, the draft law, which is submitted by the government, introduces the real estate tax from each square meter of housing. That means that even the pensioner who has one room of 30 square meters will have to pay for this house. housing. Is that correct? I'm sure that at the moment when the real incomes of people go down, when the economy is in recession, to introduce additional taxes for everything is wrong. The size of the tax for the apartment of 100 square meters, the tax will be 2,500 hryvnias. Is it a lot or a little? For common people who get average salaries, this will be too big sum of money. That's not time for introducing such taxes. And another part, it's again not about business. It's concerns every citizen. The draft law offered to give more powers to tax authorities. On the one hand, they force business to report on every purchases which will be made by physical persons for the sum of more than 11,000 hryvnias. If you bought something for the sum more than 11,000 hryvnias, you will have to report to the tax authorities. And something what Klimenko and Nazarov were dreaming about, that every person will have to report on their incomes, and also tax authorities, because of 5 reasons which are not very clear. They will have the right to come to check where the physical person's income corresponds their expenses. I wanted to say, so will they be looking into the refrigerators? But this draft law renews and creates the rights for tax authorities which they have never had, or against which we were for so many years. So I'm absolutely convinced that draft law, there are 3 draft laws, they have no right for existence, and they have to be returned to the Cabinet of Ministers for additional work on them.
Tatyana Shevtsova. Good morning. In my intervention, I would like to provide examples how those pieces of legislation which were passed back in 2012 and what disproportions and conflicts has caused their implementation. Just an example with rent payments, rent tax. Of course, this is quite right when the government wishes to get revenues to the budget through this tax, but what is in practice? In March, the law number 1156 has raised taxes which allowed to increase revenues to the budget, but this resulted in great confusion when calculating the taxation base, and the law does not provide any recommendations how to determine this taxation base. The methodology suggested by the new pieces of legislation does not allow to apply the methodology of calculating the price for rent payments because it is not developed actually in Ukraine. The regulation number 1166 also does not clarify the issue and creates even more confusion. Then later in July, the law number 1620 was passed in the parliament. This very law provides for temporary provisions and recommends to calculate taxation base for subsoil use based on the metal produced from the ore, which is produced in course of subsoil activities. Thus, actually, taxpayers actually have the right not to pay this tax at all. The reason for this confusion is that those pieces of legislation were passed without any public consultations, without any public discussion, without consultations with experts. And this allows companies and taxpayers to look for the ways to evade from tax payments. On the other hand, those laws do not guarantee that the revenues to the state budget will come. Actually, all these issues around that laws are multiplied by the fact of new problems created by those laws. For example, the law on rent payments preserves the old definitions and concepts existing in the previous law on this matter. And for example, the definition of income tax. While in the bill number 5079, there is actually new concept of the income tax, which is not referred to in the law on rent payments. Thus, actually, when all those tax provisions are in force, they will decrease the calculation base for rent payments. These non-transparent decisions, which ignore views of experts and opinion of business, they give birth to further problems. Actually, many people agree that accounting and tax accounting should be brought closer to each other. They should be harmonized. But the laws which are passed now or are in course of passing, they do not bring these two types of accounting together. They separate them even more, and this is a huge difference between the intention and the result. And this objective of bringing closer two types of accounting, tax accounting and financial accounting, is not resolved by the suggested legislation. Also, those laws give preferences to some types of activities. For example, TV and radio broadcasting, which is now regulated by tax code, is totally omitted. Totally changed by the new proposed law. If experts are not heard by the government, then this may result in new ambiguities in the situation. We have the right to be heard, and this attitude towards society is unacceptable. Good morning. I would like to start with the story of our organization, Reanimation Package of Reforms, which was founded back in March 2014, immediately understood that tax reform is needed. Because tax system was used for as the economic background for that forces against which the society raised Maidan. And We immediately started our cooperation with the Ministry of Economy and developed the concept and discussed necessary pieces of legislation. But later on, drafting of those new legislation was carried out by the ministry inside itself without any consultations with the broad public. A new tax code, which is called by Prime Minister the Code of Economic Growth, causes doubts from me in terms of growth. This is actually the code of fiscal pressure. The first sign of this is the attitude to people. For example, when any person wants to be employed, it has to inform the tax service. If tax service reveals that they were not informed about employment of this or that person, they have the right to impose a fine of 36,000 hryvnia. That is, they have the right to come to any business entity and point out you have a person who is not registered as an employee in our service and you need to pay fine. So once you declare that you have a flat and later on a tax inspector may come and request you to explain where have you got this or that flat, and this tax inspector can impose a huge fine on you. This is a corruption component. If you wish to introduce this provision, let us start with state bureaucrats and government top officials. If top officials have to comply with the norm, they have to declare this all their property, and then there will be reasonable for tax authorities to come and check that declaration. Actually, we have doubts that this very norm will be applied towards civil servants and that it won't be distortionally applied to local citizens, to civil people. Also, it increases taxes for physical persons, and it will increase taxation up to 54% of income for those who receive minimal income. And actually, for those who receive up to 6,000 hryvnia, the taxation will be at the level of 42% of wage, and this is at the level which is now in Europe. We are occupying one of the least positions in terms of wages in Europe. Why should people pay such a huge taxes? Also, I would like to discuss the joint tax burden existing in the country. Last year, there was 40% of the GDP which was distributed through the state budget. This year, more than 50% of GDP is distributed through the state budget. Actually, the government is doing nothing to cut down government spending, and they tend to distribute everything through the state budget and to get more and more from business. When we familiarized ourselves with that draft laws, we felt ourselves shocked with the reality that the economy is in recession and the cabinet of ministers wishes to destroy it. Olga Bogdanova, I would add on the on VAT administration procedure. All of us agree that there should be electronic administration of VAT. When the law 1621 will come to force from January 1st, business will need to pay VAT in advance through advance payments, and unfortunately this will considerably decrease the operative expenses, and we provided our comments to this law, but unfortunately they were not taken into consideration.
We believe that passing this law will worsen the business climate, the investment climate in Ukraine, which business is basically crashed. According to Mr. Kamutynik, introducing special accounts will allow to change the situation, and the state budget will get up to 20 billion hryvnias additional. These are our money. I would like to remind that the main issues are negative meanings. How will they be included into electronic administering? That issue hasn't been resolved. We wrote the request and we received that as of the 1st of August, there are 3.6 billion hryvnias on the accounts of taxpayers. And the budget recovery of repayment of VAT, repayment of VAT only for the companies who correspond to the criteria of automatic repayment of VAT. That criteria added investors, but out of 3 norms, 20 persons in the company, and so on. And they replaced by 1 criteria only. The assets are to be 12 times higher than the sum stated for reimbursement. And that will lead to cutting down the number of companies which will be able to use the budgetary reimbursement. And there are many other items. I will not enumerate them all, but in the end, I would like to say, as of today, there's a big question. They don't know the list of companies. They don't know who is in the shadow economy. We will finish our presentation by public address. The fiscal services, you don't know who uses these services. You want to kill all the normal business. I will later read our address also. Dmytro, very briefly, if you may. All Ukrainian Agrarian Council, I would like to add to what the previous speaker said. The law on VAT accounts, that's the law on legalized corruption. That is one of the most corrupt draft laws. Just imagine, they create special accounts, but they will have them in one bank monopolist, which they themselves define, instead of all the banking system operating. We take money from all the banks and give it only to one, so that it has all the money. That's an example.
Ну, я бы скажу так, беспредельным
of how corrupt this law is, and the way how it was passed again shows how corrupt it is. The law is submitted on the 30th, and it's passed on the 31st, and the committee receives it on the 4th next month. The law is passed without discussing in sectoral committees. That is why probably they made the voting secret. And another moment which characterizes this law introduces the solidarity system of responsibility of taxpayer. And because of that, that is how the tax authorities trying to control everything. If your counteragent sends this VAT somewhere, but you pay this VAT to him, you will have to, and your counteragent did something to it, you will have to pay VAT again. But the tax authorities, instead of finding, instead of stopping stealing, they will be finding those who are guilty. And another thing which concerns agrarians, we have the only system of state support, the so-called special regime of VAT. No other support we have. We are lagging behind Europe 20 times, 8 times from Russia, 15 times from Russia, 8 times from US, and that's one thing that supports us. But we have to compete with those who have higher support in the international market. The system is the VAT, which the company creates. It can leave for itself for development. It's very easy now. I know what my VAT is. I put it on a special account and I send it for the development. And now they say, you put it on a special account and we will make a decision whether you can use it or not. We know how the tax authorities decide whether they will do it for money, just as they used to do that, or we will never see this VAT. That's another corrupt norm. That is a law on legalized corruption, which allows to get more than they owe you. And I would like to support Illya Neskhodovskyi. That is the problem. And where this additional flow goes, whether it will go into the pocket or to the state budget, they're not willing to think about how to reduce the budget. Who else? There are many of us. During the last week, we had several roundtables. We got many NGOs, sectoral business organizations, and on the 22nd, on the platform of Ukrainian Union of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists, we drafted the open address. And this open address was signed by many companies, besides having signatures of the companies and associations in Kiev. I receive just letters. That is business. Those who read your draft laws, they read your law 1621. We are against that. So, open address of the representatives of associations, business and Ukrainian expert community to the President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yatsenyuk, Head of the Committee of Verkhovna Rada on Tax and Customs Policy, Khamutynik, Minister of Finance, Shlapak, Head of State Fiscal Service, Belarus, with the representatives of associations, business, Ukrainian expert community, want to express deep concern that was caused because of the draft laws 5078, 5079, 5080, and the law which is passed 1621. Taking it all, we demand to recommend to the Cabinet of Ministers to take away the law, to cancel the norms of 1621, to have the public hearings of the law 50, 79, 50, 80, in the result of public hearings and public discussions to develop the agreed on by experts and business environment, the package of economic, social, and tax reforms. Nova Kraina Sebastianovich. What I would like to say, I will not talk about the details of these laws that has been already mentioned, but I would like to say that Ukrainian community is now in a very difficult situation. It's like double occupation. On the one hand, we have an external enemy. On the other hand, we have this internal enemy, which is planning to rob us thanks to these laws, and we cannot oppose that, but just apply some radical measures. If the government doesn't do something, doesn't sit at a round table with the civil society, then this will be something very awful. We cannot even assess what these laws can lead to. That is something similar to the 16th of January. The entrepreneurs do not know that, but when Verkhovna Rada passes it, there will be a new tax Maidan. What's happening now? The government introduces to the Verkhovna Rada the laws which are not approved, agreed on with anyone. For half a year, the experts were working on that. There were working groups at the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance. Not a single proposal of these groups was taken into consideration. Everything was ignored. And today, even Belarus said that he did not participate in that. Who was writing that? So it happens that tax militia files dozens of criminal cases against entrepreneurs. In 2004, that was 2,500 such cases a year. In 2013, 5,000 cases a year. What do you believe? If the entrepreneur who had tax police coming to him, will he then pay to the budget? No, they pay to the pocket of the militia. And these laws give more powers to tax militia. I would like to address the government. Stop. If you do not understand how this may end up, call your predecessors. Poroshenko may call Yanukovych, Yatsenyuk may call Lazarov, our prosecutor general may call Pshonka, and we'll find out how this may end up. So the government, please think, sit at the table of negotiations. We will do what we want. The society will live the way it wants. You can do it today without bloodshed. In half a year, there will be a new Maidan. And we have just 5 minutes left. After all that, I would like just to say that we do hope that the dialogue will be resumed, and on Monday we are planning here in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, we are planning to have a round table, and we are addressing publicly the Minister of Finance of Ukraine, Shlopak, the head of State Fiscal Service, Belarus, and we invite them to participate in this roundtable in order to discuss all the problems which we mentioned, and so that we start some dialogue. Thank you. Dmytro Mykhaylenko. And what hasn't been mentioned, the law on the draft law on the Service of Financial Investigation gives lots of powers to the service, but it gives no guarantees to taxpayers. The criminal cases are filed. Now, if they are not filed, then it's not because of the law, but because of the personal order of Khamenko. But there should be the balance between what the service can do and there should be the reforms in the criminal and criminal procedural legislation to create some guarantees and balance and guarantees for taxpayers. We have some questions some minutes for questions. I have a question. Today, almost all experts were saying that we need to do something with the expenditures. These are not just the civil servants, but the other parts of population. you are the source of filling in these funds. But you know that what's happening with money, no one understands. There's no transparency. Are you ready? Maybe you have initiated something already. I will briefly talk about what's happening in social and non-social sphere. In social sphere, 30 billion from pension fund goes, no one knows to who. These are dead souls, people who have have no right to receive pensions, but they're receiving them. So that's more than 30 billion. Then another thing, it's on pensions to people who who retire early, those who are using the early retirement. The fiscal service retires early, and at 40, when they are 40, they receive pension, but then continue to work. Now, on non-social articles, how much have they reduced the expenditures for prosecutor's office? With Yanukovych, it was growing many times, was growing by billions, and now has it been reduced? No, absolutely not reduced, not a single kopeck. They continue to finance this body in the same volumes, and the same is true about Ministry of the Interior, but the Ministry of Interior participates actively in anti-terrorist operations. We understand that for their support and development money is needed, but there are many structures like the judicial branch. We need to understand why do we need so many judicial systems. What do we do to reduce this social tension? We believe that social assistance should be received by those who have grounds. Now, there is the situation when the social assistance is received by people who have huge houses, apartments, and they continue to receive social assistance. MPs who get some material support, civil servants who receive some material support and bonuses, and that continues, despite what Yatsenyuk said, that was just payroll, but they, besides that, they get additional payments. That's all under the competence of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. And talking about what hasn't been mentioned now, reformers from Georgia, Slovak Republic, Baltic states come to Ukraine and they share their experience. We know how to resolve these problems, how to resolve the problem of pension fund and social payments. But the government doesn't take it into account, does not take our proposals of these reformers. I like the Georgian experience very much.
And just one remark. You mentioned pension system. We should understand we have two pension systems in the country, for ordinary people and for bureaucrats. Our bureaucrats actually get 2 times more, and let's look at the results of their work for the last 20 years. I believe that the results suggest that they should get pension 2 times less than ordinary people, because during that 20 years, the bureaucrats simply robbed us, and that's it. In the country, there is a distribution system which is aimed at providing minimal level. There should not be a group of citizens which has paid much higher income than other groups of citizens. This is absolutely obvious. They should be eliminated, but the government does not do this. Let's apply the indirect measures of monitoring income to all that bureaucrats who have a lot of property. And if we apply the tax rate of 30% on all on the amount or the of all that property which they possess, we would fill in the budget immediately. So on Monday, you will have another chance to send this message during our roundtable with the Ministry of